It's the late 90s. Talkomatic, the first publicly accessible chat room, is now a thing of the past. The latest technological craze, post the creation of the internet, is actually Talkomatic's babies. MSN, Yahoo, and AOL seem to be the most popular. People from across the globe begin to connect with one another, and although many will later claim that newer social media sites are responsible for this, it is in fact these chat rooms that help usher in a new wave of global communication. Although many people use this groundbreaking technology in a positive way, there's others who use it for nefarious reasons. Those reasons continue to be a growing problem until this very day. That problem? Grooming minors, and in some cases, meeting up with and them.
You've taught your children to be polite and friendly, but have you taught them when not to be?
Hi there. Do you live around here?
Uh-huh.
You going to school?
Yes.
Well, I could give you a ride.
Last year, 50,000 children disappeared, many of them from nice, safe neighborhoods.
It's okay. Come on, hop in.
Talk to your children about not talking to strangers, and do it today. A message for your child's safety from the American...
The Stranger Danger campaign, where parents and people in positions of authority warn children about the potential dangers of strangers. Here in the United Kingdom, it's been around for decades and was promoted across the island after the convictions of Myra Hindley and Ian Brady. Between July 1963 and October 1965, the pair abducted and murdered 5 children in cold blood. Some of them were raped before they were killed. 30 years on from the Moors murders, and a whole new type of stranger danger campaign had swept the nation: the dangers of online child predators. By the late 90s, early 2000s, police were aware that there was a problem with this new variant of child sex offender, but the reality was, it was such a new issue that there was barely any funding. However, that would soon change. It isn't entirely clear who the first documented online predator was in the United States, but we do know that 28-year-old Kenneth Lockley was the first in the United Kingdom. A computer worker who used the internet to feed his evil fantasies for young girls was caught after an operation by Californian police in Scotland Yard. Kenneth Lockley, 28, was the first person to be charged in this country for inciting an undercover officer to procure a girl aged 9 for sex using the internet. Lockley had admitted inciting an undercover police officer to procure a girl for unlawful sexual intercourse and distributing indecent photographs. The first charge carries a maximum of 2 years and the second 3 years. Lockley was jailed for 18 months at the Old Bailey yesterday. By 2003, online child predators became so much of an issue, Parliament had to introduce a new sexual offence bill to tackle the growing problem. Many cases had helped push for this bill to be introduced, but 2 that made nationwide headlines at the time were the cases of Douglas Lindsell and Michael Wheeler. Douglas, dubbed the world's most prolific internet groomer, had regular inappropriate contact with more than 70 children after posing as a teenage boy in online chat rooms. He would go on to create a database which included details of the children's hair and eye color, the school they attended, and intimate details such as bra size and sexual likes and dislikes. Douglas met 2 of his victims, but they ultimately made a run for it when they discovered who he really was. Police say he was inches from sexually assaulting or raping the girls. Douglas was eventually caught after he had sent a naked photograph of himself in the post to a 16-year-old girl in Manchester. Thankfully, he made the mistake of leaving his contact details on the back of the image, and when the girl's mother found it, she contacted the police. Douglas was subsequently arrested and his computer was seized. That's when police found his database and chat logs where he told some of the children he wanted to rape them. He was eventually handed a 5-year sentence, but was released after serving just 2.5 years.
He would encourage girls to describe their school uniforms and then deduce what school they attended. He even turned up at the school gates to try to find them. When 2 victims, aged 13 and 14, agreed to meet him, he tried but failed to entice them into his car. And in his diary, Lindsell kept intimate details of all the teenagers he chatted to.
It really is quite frightening, the amount of information that Mr. Lindsell was actually able to gather from these girls. He was able to dupe them into believing that they were talking to a teenage boy on the internet who was a friend to them.
frankly, you know, we've got to ask the people who are continuing to provide these chat room services, what more are you going to do to try to make sure that cases like this don't happen? It seems to me we've got to have a much better way of verifying who people are when they log into these chat rooms.
And chat rooms like a playground, like a public park, like a shopping mall, you wouldn't let your child roam in those areas for 4, 5, 6, you know, long hours, long periods of the day without watching them and be guarded with them.
36-year-old electronics engineer Michael Wheeler had entered online chat rooms with the intention of sexually abusing children and had used a legal loophole to help get less years in jail if he was ever caught. You see, at the time, the law in the United Kingdom stated that if a person rapes a child under the age of 13, then the minimum sentence began at life. Whereas if the child was over the age of 13, then the minimum sentence began at 3 years. Sadly, he used this loophole in his favour. Michael would go on to groom an 11-year-old girl he met on an online chat room for 2 years before eventually raping her just days after her 13th birthday. The rape continued for months. He would then go on to rape another girl he had met via the first victim, again just days after her 13th birthday. Michael was eventually caught after the first victim's father and her friends became suspicious, as Michael would be spotted with the victim while she was out in public. He would go on to deny the charges that were placed against him and said he treated the girls like his daughters. But when his devices were seized, police found message exchanges showing that wasn't the case. In court, Michael laughed as the prosecution read out the evidence to the judge. Michael knew that by waiting until his victims turned 13, he could play the system. And that's exactly what happened. Michael was sentenced to just 3 years in prison, although what should be noted is that he had 18 months added onto his sentence at the Court of Appeals. After these cases hit the news, along with others, lawmakers were essentially forced into changing the law to protect children. Too many predators, especially those who were targeting kids online, were committing heinous crimes and justice wasn't being served. However, that changed at the end of 2003 when the Sexual Offences Act was put into law, and finally harsher sentences were put in place for online predators. It wasn't just the United Kingdom who had caught on to what child predators were doing online. It was the United States as well. By that point, American law enforcement agencies were working with their UK counterparts to bring down paedophiles, but most, if not all, the operations were kept hush to prevent offenders from catching on to police tactics. However, that was all about to change when one man would replicate what the police were doing and broadcast his findings to the world. In 2003, Philip John Eade, aka Xavier von Erck, created Perverted Justice, an organization based in California and Oregon which investigated, identified, and publicized the conduct of adults who used chat rooms and other social media to solicit online sexual conversations and in-person meetings with minors. I was inspired to action after learning how many of my female friends were molested as kids, and how many would-be paedophiles lurked in regional chat rooms. I and another man named Frank set out to clean up our Portland chat room. It worked a little too well, and few too many people wanted to help. So after we exhausted all the Portland rooms, we moved on and kept going. The organisation, made up of volunteers, carried out stings for over 15 years before eventually ceasing operations for reasons that have never been stated. Their tactics had been labelled controversial, with critics stating that their actions led to illegal entrapment of targets. Others, however, looked at them as heroes. They highlighted the issue in the early days when there wasn't much funding for police to combat online child predators. In 2004, Perverted Justice caught the eye of journalist Chris Hansen, who would eventually be the frontman for Dateline NBC's To Catch a Predator. Although Chris would be the person to confront the predators, it was actually Perverted Justice who did all the work behind the scenes.
Well, I was always interested in investigative crime type stories, enterprise stories, things where we employed hidden cameras. And so when I learned about this online watchdog group, Perverted Justice, I started to think if we could use their ability to be decoys online and our ability at the network to wire a house with hidden cameras and microphones, it could be pretty compelling. So at the time, Perverted Justice would put decoys in the chat rooms, and if an adult approached one of the decoys posing as a 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kid, obvious profile, and there was a sexual liaison planned, they would post this person's picture and identity on the website. Well, we took it a step further. We created a scenario where we would come face to face with this potential child predator and confront them. So we did so in Bethpage, Long Island, and I was driving out there and I wondered, did we just blow tens of thousands of dollars of the network's money and nobody is going to show up, which is always, if it was easy, everybody could do it, So we didn't partner or collaborate with law enforcement for that or the second investigation. And, I'm driving out there and my producer calls and says, where the hell are you? We've got 2 guys scheduled in 45 minutes. And, 2.5 days later, 17 guys had surfaced in that investigation, including a New York City firefighter. So the show kind of sat at the network for a minute. Yeah. And people were in the executive ranks trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? How do we do it? This is obviously phenomenally compelling material. Right. I mean, stuff that has never been seen on television before.
The show was eventually cancelled in 2008 following the suicide of Assistant District Attorney Bill Conrad. Bill had been talking to and exchanging pictures with a Perverted Justice decoy who posed as a 13-year-old boy. When police attempted to serve him with a search warrant, he fatally shot himself. This all went down while NBC camera crews were filming. Bill's estate initially sued Dateline for $105 million in damages, but eventually they settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Perverted Justice would assist in the convictions of 623 child predators, but in reality, they're responsible for a hell of a lot more because of the copycat hunting groups that had been formed as the result of their work. It isn't entirely clear who the first copycat was, but we do know that the first person to replicate Perverted Justice's work in the United Kingdom was 42-year-old Kieran Parsons, also known as Stinson Hunter. After breaking up with his girlfriend in 2009, Kieran Parsons began to channel his energy into catching online predators after one of his favourite TV shows, To Catch a Predator, had ended. After breaking up with my ex, a friend said she'd come over for a chat and to have a drink. She was supposed to bring alcohol with her, but when she arrived, she was empty-handed and said I got asked for ID. That gave me the idea to use her picture to pose as a 15-year-old girl on a chat room to see if we could get a catch. The fake profile was an experiment, one that would work instantly. Within minutes, men approached to engage in sexual conversations. It was the first I'd seen for the online grooming exploitation world. Although Kieran began predator hunting in 2009, he wouldn't broadcast the stings until 4 years later under the alias Stinson Hunter. And well, the rest was history. What followed was nationwide media attention, an initial pushback from law enforcement, hundreds of thousands of followers on Facebook, and an award-winning documentary that would eventually end up on Netflix. Stinson ended up having many viral moments during his time as a paedophile hunter, but there's 2 cases in particular that tend to be attached to his name. On the 29th of May, 2013, 45-year-old Michael Parks was arrested after attempting to meet with someone who he thought was a 12-year-old child for sex. Instead, he came face-to-face with Stinson Hunter. As a result of the sting, Michael was arrested and questioned by police. But before they could charge him, he killed himself.
Because he made the choices himself.
So you don't think the public humiliation of having his photo put online is what pushed him over the edge?
Dunno. Nobody can say any different.
Can you just wash your hands of it like that?
Well, I have done. Why should I care? I didn't know him. It's easy to blame people. It's easy to sit here and say, Stinson did it. We'll blame Stinson, scapegoat, we can use him. But why don't you blame the actual person that, A, committed a crime, right? B, put a rope around his neck and killed himself. And I will never feel bad for it. I refuse to feel bad for it. I don't care he's dead.
At Stephen Stapleton in August of 2013, he thought he was about to meet up with a girl under the age of 16 with the intention of having sex with her. Instead, he came face-to-face with Stinson Hunter. When this video was published on Facebook, it went viral. So much in fact that the parents of another child came forward to police to tell them that Stephen had raped their daughter 7 years prior. Police would go on to question Stephen about the new allegations, and he surprisingly admitted to them. He was eventually sentenced to 9 years over the sting operation and the rape conviction. In 2018, Stinson Hunter stepped away from child predator stings, although he would keep posting to his social media platforms, which he still does until this very day. It isn't entirely clear why he made the decision to step away from the spotlight, but we do know that it had something to do with his mental health. Although Stinson took a step back, many other groups emerged because they wanted to get involved. Some were outright vigilantes, others imitated Stinson's operations, working with police to bring down child sex offenders. Whatever the approach, it led to viral moments. One group that was founded around the time Stinson had stepped away was Guardian Angels, a group from Lincolnshire, headed by a mother of 3, Mandy Bradley. Although the group operated out of Lincolnshire, they travelled across the United Kingdom to confront child predators. In February of 2018, the team assisted police with an arrest in Derbyshire, but on that occasion, the police requested information about members of the group, which hadn't been done previously. It was at that point, ladies and gentlemen, that something truly horrific was discovered. Member Michael Terry was himself a child sex offender. He had managed to infiltrate the group and become the head of Guardian Angel Security. Once Mandy found out, Michael was confronted. In January of 2015, Michael Terry had been given a 5-year sexual offences prevention order after being convicted of indecent exposure and inciting a girl under the age of 16 to engage in a sexual act. He had met an underage girl online and the pair exchanged nude images. The order banned him from having contact with children under the age of 16 and from staying at an address overnight where a child under the age of 16 was living. However, in October of that same year, 2015, he breached the order. At the end of October, Michael Terry had met 2 women on a night out. The women had mutual friends with him. That in itself wasn't an issue, but the moment Michael stepped foot in their home after this night out, it was. You see, the 2 women were mothers to very young children, and instead of leaving the house when he realised that was the case, he stayed overnight, therefore breaching his sexual offences prevention order. He would continue to breach the order for the following 2 weeks because he returned to the home on multiple occasions and at times had even collected the children from school and nursery. It isn't entirely clear how police managed to find out he breached the order, but we do know that in February of 2016, he was jailed for 12 months for doing so. Upon his release in 2017, Michael Terry joined the Guardian Angels after befriending Mandy on Facebook. His role as head of security meant that he would stay at Mandy's overnight while her 3 young children were at home. This continued for several months before his name was flagged by police as a part of that sting in Derbyshire in February of 2018. For the offence, Michael Terry was handed a 20-month jail sentence. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how a paedophile infiltrated a hunter group.